Let's go. Okay, we got down to the bottom of page 331. No more blood. Which page? 331. The bottom. Okay, yesterday the Rebbe talked about the Indian of Svius Ratzon, satisfaction. How not to become an akara, how not to become barren. So there were two different levels of barrenhood, right? In Gashmias and in Ruchnias. Again explaining the Rebbe, third part of the Maimer, the Rebbe explaining how to do a Veda. First part of the Maimer, does our Veda affect the Eibishter? Second part of the Maimer, what is a Veda? Third part of the Maimer, how to do a Veda. How do we do it? Right? So the Rebbe said that the pasuk, Leisi mishakela v'akara bartzecho, that pasuk is teaching us how to be successful in our Veda. What was the akara? Two different levels of akara. Two different levels of a barren woman in Gashmias. A person who doesn't have the physical apparati necessary to give birth, for whatever reason there's a problem, or a person who does, but for whatever reason it doesn't, they're not unable to conceive. Right? In Ruchnias, what is that? Not having the fertile ground to give birth. So the Rebbe talked about a base matron, probably in English that's referring to a uterus. Right? What's the base matron? The place that accepts the pregnancy and nurtures the baby. Okay. What's that in Ruchnias? Intellectual excitement. Right? If a person isn't excited about ideas of regarding elokus, godliness, so then there's no havamin. He's going to give birth to love and fear in his heart. There's nothing, there's no connection, there's no relationship, there's nothing. No excitement. We talked about the four different levels, right? Meichin, Mides shebamechin, Meichin shebamides, and Mides. Okay, we're not going back over that, right? But we talked about those four levels in terms of just the technical aspect of it, in terms of how Chassidus explains the idea of hispailu siflis. Okay, and the way in which intellect can affect emotion. Right. So. The first level is Timtum HaMeich, that the person intellectually isn't a kli to have any connection to the Eibishter because they don't find ideas about the Eibishter interesting. Why not? They don't get excited. Why not? So the Rebbe said, kli male in a machzik, a full vessel doesn't hold anything. What's the full vessel? What's the person full of? Their own desires, their own agenda, their own inyonim, themselves. Right? So they're so full of themselves, so they don't have room for anything else. Now, and then the Rebbe said in a rather challenging way, obviously that refers to desires of the Yetzer Hara. Obviously that refers to desires of the Nefesh Abamis. But the Rebbe said even the desires of the Nefesh Elokis, even the Ritzonos of the Nefesh Elokis, and what the Rebbe described as desires of the Nefesh Elokis, my own spiritual agenda. Right? What I decided is the way to serve God, as opposed to what the Eibishter says. Right? So to the extent that I'm full of my own agenda, so that I'm not going to let anything else in because I have to protect myself. Right? I have to protect my a priori assumptions. Right? So I'm not going to get excited about anything that might be challenging. So that was the first level. That was Timtum HaMeich. Then it was Timtum HaLev, that even though the person might be excited about ideas, but still has a hard time bringing them down into their emotional state so they actually connect to those things and feel a revealed love and fear in their heart. That the Rebbe said is also coming from the state of ritzonos, right? Their own desires, their own agenda. Then the Rebbe told this amazing idea about planting a seed of love and fear at the beginning of the year. Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the Eibishter plants a seed of love and fear in us. He impregnates us with love and fear. And our job is to nurture that so that it ultimately produces true love and fear in our heart over time. That was Ois Hey. Vav, the Rebbe explains the idea of mishakela. What's mishakela? Losing the child. That I might be able to give birth to love and fear, but I lose it. And then we met that guy, right? None of us have ever met him in real life, but the guy the Rebbe described at the beginning of the paragraph, who knows all the kavanas of mitzvahs, love, fear, knows all the kavanas, understands all of the different the levels of godliness that he's mamshik through different mitzvahs. Mamish, this most serious guy we've ever not met. Even that guy has to be careful. What does he have to be careful about? Satisfaction. Svias ratzon. Right? And that's the word artsecha in the verse. Leisim mishakela v'arkara be'artsecha. In your land. Simple pshat. But what does it mean? Aretz miloshin ratzon, which we talked about. Again, we saw that yesterday. So the svias ratzon, the satisfaction, not simcha, right? Simcha is important and simcha is amazing, and without simcha there's no avodah. Satisfaction means I'm satiated. That means I've done enough. That experience relative to our relationship with the Kadosh Baruch Hu will bring about one of two things. Either we won't grow or we'll shrink. Right? The Rebbe was talking about the shrinking of it, losing the love and fear. Because then my Aveda will only be that which is necessary to bring about this state of satisfaction. So then that doesn't have a lot to do with me. With the Kadosh Baruch Hu, it has a lot to do with me, my spiritual satisfaction. So we're back to square one if we let that happen. Okay? Fine. We finished the paragraph, yeah? Umamshich b'kosov. The leisim mishakela v'akara b'artzecha. What's the second half of that pasuk? Es mispar yomecha malei. The number of your days I will fill. That was the second time we saw first person in the psukim, right? V'vadatem es v'alokechem, serve God. Ubeirach es lachmecha v'esmeimecha, and He, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Elokecha, will bless your bread and your water. You'll have brach and gashmis, right? And then what did it say? And I will remove sickness from your midst. That's how we understood that our avodah affects even atzmos, right? The next pasuk, so there went from third person to first person. The next pasuk also, es mispar yamecha amalei. I will fill up the days. Okay. So first the Rebbe is going to rip our kishkas out, and then he's going to make us feel a little better. Okay, so when he rips your kishkas out, don't get so nervous, because he is going to make us feel a little better after that. Okay, but first it's very challenging. Umamshich b'kosav es mispar yomecha malei. The pasuk continues and says, the number of your days I will fill. And what is this part of the pasuk? So this whole pasuk has been, the second pasuk, has been the advice how to serve a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So to this, shazuya eitza yeutza, this is the advice given, kedei lifel benafshe, bottom of page 331, lifel benafshe, hergesh shel heder, svias aratzon. Right? How to bring about in his soul a lack of satisfaction. How to maintain, how to stay away from the notion of satisfaction. Again, satisfaction is, I've done enough. What I've accomplished is good enough. Not that it's not good. It's good, it's wonderful. We had that whole long discussion yesterday, which I hope we don't have again today. Right, about, what's the word? Something myself, what am I, which is important to do at certain points, but it depends where you are. Anyway, there's a word. I said my wife came back from those parenting things with this word, right? And then Yosef said the word validate. Thank you very much. Validate myself. Okay. Validate myself. So now when do I have to validate myself? When I'm feeling not so good about myself. Okay, so if I'm not feeling so good about myself, so then I better do some things. Right? That's not what the Rebbe is talking about. Right? He's talking about a situation where a person is in a state of emotional equilibrium, doesn't have issues, etc., but he wants to serve God very seriously. What might happen? He might say that I've reached a state where he's satisfied with his service of the Eibishter. He's done it. His learning is just where he'd like it to be, and his davening is where he'd like it to be. Okay, as much as that's an incredible thing to be in a place where your learning and davening is something that is positive and it's working, but there's still more to go, right? Don't have to stop here. Mm-hmm. And most people, when it comes to money, don't get satisfied. They always want more. Rich people always want more. Chazal say, Yesh le'mana reitzeh masayim. A person has 100, wants 200. Okay, so that should also be the case in Ruchnius, right? It should overcome that in Gashmias and be sameach bechelkai, happy in his lot, but not to be happy in his lot in Ruchnius, in spirituality. Always to strive for more. Ve'inyan bezeh, shekasher ha'adam mizbeini. When a person contemplates, shenitnu lo yomim ktsuvim, that he's been given a finite amount of days. Ksuvim means an established amount of days. Yomim yutzru, days have been created. In other words, he has a limited amount of time in Olam Hazeh. Lo pachas v'lo yeser, not more and not less and not more. Uv'chol yom, and every day, uv'chol shah, uv'chol rega, every hour, every moment, sarich laved avidosei, he has to do his service, l'malei shlichusei ba'al madain, to fulfill his shlichus in Olam Hazeh. That shlichus being to reveal Elokus in Olam Hazeh, as the Rebbe's talked about. Harihu tarid b'zeh kol kach. He's so involved in this, ad she'ein lo panai klal, until he doesn't have free time at all, lach shov, to think, oides inyanim shel madreges, about matters of madreges, where he's holding, what level he's reached, how well he's doing, or perhaps the opposite. Al derech maimer Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai. The Rebbe now says an amazing pshat in a very, very famous Gemara. The Gemara says, details Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai's conversation with his students at the end of his life. He was the leader of the generation, amazing Talmid Chacham, teacher of the people who ended up being the most ubiquitous students in the Mishnah. Right? Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai, unbelievable person. And yet, what did he say at the end of his life? I don't know where they're taking me. Now, simple pshat, that's very hard to understand. What's a havmina? Gehenna or Gan Eden? Well, it's not much of... With Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai, I don't know whether that's necessarily a question. Is this false modesty? No, he's a real person. Right? He's not into false modesty. Right? He's a real person. So he's asking an interesting. I don't know where they're taking me. What does he mean? What? He can't mean, am I going to Gehenna or am I going to Gan Eden? It's obvious he's going to Gan Eden because he's the biggest tzaddik of the generation and an incredibly positive and holy person, and he knows that. Right? Not that he knows that he's haughty regarding it. He knows that because he knows the Eibishter gave him tremendous keiches, and he used those keiches in a tremendous way in his life. Right? He knows what was happening in his life. Well, evidently, we'll see whether he knows what was happening in his life. Let's see what the Rebbe says about him. It's really quite amazing. Umiya biurim bezeh. Amongst the biurim. Now, usually when the Rebbe says that, that means he's about to say something that no one else ever said. And if you look at the footnote 72, it says, you want to see other biurim, so look over there. Meaning you're not going to find this one anywhere. You'll find it here. And then you should tie your shoes tighter so your socks don't fly out. So I was about to say something. Still on.
Yeah, I just put it
Oh. Okay. I'm used to someone going over there and hitting it, and it stops. What did Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai mean? Shemitzad Godel Tiodose, because of his great involvement, b'milui shlichusei, in filling his shlichus, lehaya lepanai, he didn't have free time, losim lev, To lasim lev means to focus on, think about, literally to put your heart, suheren sich, to think about, lemadrege shaloi, where he was holding, right? What level he had reached. Vahainu, shu tared v'shakua koikach, that he's so involved and sunk. Shakua means sunk. Not in a bad way. I mean, he's so sunk into what he was sent to Elam Hazeh to do. And now why? I never understand exactly why it is sometimes Yiddish is put in brackets. The Maimar, of course, was said in Yiddish, but it's printed in Lashon HaKodesh. Always wondered why that is. Once asked Rabbi Groner why siches were printed in Yiddish and Maimarim are printed in Lashon HaKodesh. So he said he's not sure, but his understanding is as follows, that a Maimar is Teresh B'Chsav, which is written in Lashon HaKodesh, and a siche is Teresh B'Al Peh, which is written in the generic language, Aramaic. Right? Gemara is written in Aramaic, the language people spoke. Right? Whereas the Maimar was said in Yiddish, but it was always Maimarim. There is this one sefer called Sefer Maimarim B'Yiddish of the Frierdiker Rebbe, but generally Maimarim are printed in Yiddish, in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh, right? Which is interesting. Right? Sichas were generally printed in Yiddish, in the original. That was Rabbi Groner's answer. Is that the answer? I don't know.
You would call the lasim lev, you said think about, but like reflecting and
thinking, focusing on, notice. I mean, sometimes lasim lev, lama lo samta lev. Why didn't you notice that such and such happened? Right? You might say that in modern Hebrew. Right? Lo samta lev shelo hayu lo na'alaim. You didn't notice he didn't have shoes. The wife says to the husband as the little boy goes off to school, "Was something late that he wasn't wearing shoes." The husband might not. Puts him on, picks him up and puts him on the car that takes him away to school, and he wait, he's not wearing shoes. Wear his shoes. Right? The mother will never miss that. Right? Okay. So he's not thinking about his madrigas. What it says here. It's amazing. He's so involved. It is a zoifil for yogt, for einigt, and for trunken. Three different. For yogt is he's thinking about. Einigt he's one with. He's like united with. For trunken he's sunk into. B'milu ishlichusay. In fulfilling his shlichus b'chol yom b'chol shah b'chol rega. He realized he's been sent by HaKadosh Baruch Hu into Elam Hazeh to accomplish something, and he's completely involved in trying to figure out how to do that and do it. She'eino yodeya manaseh, that he doesn't know what's happening in sichlei mideisav, with his intellect and his midos. Valachas kama v'kam, and all the more so, b'nagei l'madregas and elamas shebenefesh. Obviously, regarding hidden levels of the soul, exactly how he's affected his soul in Elam Hazeh, hasn't thought about it because he's so busy doing what it is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from him. And from this it's understood, all the more so. It's not relevant to this person, Regishal Svias Ratzon. Obviously, he's not going to have any satisfaction. What's he having satisfaction for? Reaching a certain level, he's not even thinking about it. He's too busy doing what has to be done. Right? Just standing. Ki biyodei, in his knowledge, shebachol rega v'rega, in every moment, sayrach l'malei shlichus, has to fulfill his shlichus. We have to talk about this so you don't decide that you're a terrible, horrible person and roll up into a little ball and right? Then you have to deal with this in a healthy way, because this is very challenging, because none of us is here. And when we see something that we're not, that is challenging us to be in a place that we're not even close to, so we might think that we're no good. That's not true. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to know the truth. Right? Don't hide the truth from ourselves just because we're not yet living it. Right? That's why some people don't like learning Chassidus, because it's a little challenging, and sometimes it says the truth. And but that's not me, but it's not talking about you, it's talking about the truth. This isn't an essay on who I am. This is an essay. Well, it is an essay on who I am, but it's an essay on who I truly am and who I truly can be, even though I might not be there yet. Does that mean I'm a horrible, terrible person? Well, if I am, so then just go all the way back. If that's what happens, go all the way back to page 330 because you didn't get what the Rebbe was talking about on page 330. If that's the response to this, right? My response is, oh, I'm no good. Well, go back here because it's not all about you, right? Well, it's just not all about you. Right? Just believe, right? It's about who you can be and who you really are, but this is to every single yid, and it's not, it doesn't, right? That yid that came to the Tzemach Tzedek and he was complaining that everybody in Zal was saying things about him and not treating him nicely. Right, so he said, so the Tzemach Tzedek said to him, I didn't know that every blata is those pieces of stone on a floor. I didn't know that every blata on the stone in the base medrash is you. So where everybody steps, it's on you. I didn't know that. Right? Meaning I can just think that everything's about me. That every time anybody looks askance, they're looking at me. They're looking at you, right? It's funny thing. We tend to people can often experience a feeling of self-consciousness and therefore we're feeling certain self-consciousness, a lack of confidence based on some self-consciousness. So you might walk into a room that you don't know so many people and be self-conscious and think that the people are looking at you and you're wondering if you look right. Right? You're walking right. Sometimes people get so nervous that they even find it hard to walk, right? Walking normally they find difficult because they're just nervous walking into the room because everybody's looking at them. First of all, everybody's not looking at you. Second of all, they're probably just like you and they're wondering what you think about them and they're not thinking about what they think about you. So just settle down. It's okay. Everything's fine. Right? Don't get nervous. Right? If they're like you, then they're not thinking about you, they're thinking about themselves. Right? You're not looking at them going, oh, you're thinking, oh my, what are they thinking about me? Right? Best to think about what it is that we have to get done as opposed to what people are thinking about me and what I should be thinking about other people. Just do what has to be done. There's time on earth and we're given this time by the Eibishter to accomplish all sorts of amazing things. And it's not done yet, so we have work. Right? So what does this person know? He has to fulfill his shlichus. Now the Rebbe, it's just hard here, what can I say? And if a moment passes, that he doesn't do that which he's supposed to do. That doesn't mean he doesn't go to sleep. We'll talk about it. Not only that he was able to elevate himself and to progress in his avodah. He could have, really continued and done great things, and he didn't. I mean, he missed an opportunity. Furthermore, that's interesting. In the first printings of this mimer, there were 3 dots. 2 times in the following sentence, around footnote 75, right? And what were those dots? So we'll see. Let's read the sentence, and then we'll read footnote 75, and we'll see why there used to be 3 dots. And I see in this printed version, they took out the 3 dots, which is too bad, because it gives you anybody who's going to read it, they might not look at footnote 75, but the dots, they do. They wonder why there are dots, right? So let's see. So the Rebbe says, that he's not doing that which the Eibishter sent him to the world to do. He's rebelling against the king. In this, that he's not fulfilling his shlichus. Now, twice in that sentence, the Rebbe stopped talking, put his head on the table, and cried. Look at footnote 75. The Rebbe burst into tears. And he put his head on the table. That's so. Hearing the Rebbe's voice crack we heard the Rebbe's voice crack a lot, depending on what the Rebbe was talking about. There were certain stories that every time the Rebbe told the story, he would start to cry, right? But crying in a way that he could tell the story, you could just tell in his voice that his voice was cracking. Here, the Rebbe stopped talking, put his head on the table, and cried. Twice or 3 times. I think 3 times. And only after a little while he continued in the Maimer. Said a few words, put his head down, cried, picked up his head, said a couple of words, couldn't continue, put his head down, did that. That's why, I don't know why they took out the 3 dots. You see it. You sort of see it in the text when the 3 dots are there. But I was very serious about this. This is almost, it's like beyond anything we could imagine challenging ourselves to do. Every single moment. And the Rebbe says a moment when we're not doing, that's what we are sent to Elam Hazeh to do. So we're rebelling against the king. My goodness. So a person who reaches this level, the Rebbe says, Loi zu bilvad, shaloi shayach etzle ergish shel svias ratzon. We'll come back and talk about this. Obviously, this person has no notion of satisfaction. He's not thinking about where he's at. Right? Bartsecho. El adarabah, the opposite is true. When men fraged him, if someone were to ask him, Vos is by dir, what is by you? Meaning, what's with you? Mitten bartsecho, with your rotzones, what's you with your agenda? Right? How you doing with your life's agenda? Zayaku, shraite reis, he'll cry out, b'mar nafshe, the bitterness of his soul. Mali rotzon, mali tainug, mali ava, mali yira. What is it to me will? What is it to me pleasure? What is it to me ava, love? What is it to me yira, fear? This fear of God, love of God. Vos mir, again, Yiddish. Vos mir rotzon, vos mir tainug, vos mir ava, vos mir yira. Ketzid yochol lachshev al inyonim shel madregas. How can I sit and think about levels of accomplishment? B'shah shetzarich lamed al mishmar, have to stand on guard. Shelo yavar afil rega echad, that even one moment shouldn't pass. B'matzav shel merida b'malchus chashom, in a state of rebelling against the king. Mitzad chisaron b'milu shlichus b'rega zeh, by virtue of the fact that I'm not fulfilling my shlichus in this moment. Whoa. So a number of masholim to help us understand this, and we have to talk about it a little because we can't go crazy, right? A person can take this in a very unhealthy way. Very unhealthy. Right? Just in terms of some masholim, so the last thing the Rebbe talks about is Omer al Mishmar, soldier. Can you imagine a soldier standing there with his gun and his boots and his uniform, and he's sitting and thinking about how well he's holding the gun, and how nicely his boots are shined, and his hat's just on right. That's what he's thinking about? That's what soldiers think about? A real soldier. Right? That's what he thinks about? No. What's he thinking about? He's a soldier. He's thinking about the enemy, and how he's going to defeat the enemy. That's what he's thinking about all day long. And can he stop thinking about that for any moment? Well, he can't really, because if he stops thinking about that for any moment, they might get him. He's got to be pretty focused on that thing, right? So he's going to be, oh, gee, I shot well. That was really good. I really pulled the trigger well, and I held the gun. That was very good, very good. And he sits down and he makes himself a cup of tea, because he's done so. There's my English friends over there. Made himself a cup of tea with milk in the tea, right? He made himself a cup of tea, and he's. Now that's definitely not the English army during the Second World War. That was the French army during the Second World War. That was them, right? A friend of mine was in Lebanon in 1982, and see, what are you doing over there on your phone?
Downloading the Maimer.
Okay, that's why I asked. I assumed it was something useful, but I just wanted to make sure. A friend of mine was in Lebanon in 1982. So he was in Beirut. He and his tank were in Beirut. And so, they were sort of dirty and dusty. And the Italian army came in as part of a European force to, take out. The Israelis were going to leave, and a European force was going to come and take, whatever, one of these deals. The Italian army came in. He said that they just burst out laughing. They came in. They all had these white uniforms with these big plumes coming out of their helmets. They looked like mamish, some designer in Milan had designed this uniform. The last thing you'd ever want to do in this uniform is get dirty. Right? Now you're a soldier. What do you care what your uniform looks like? What do you care what you just... Well, the only thing you have to make sure is your gun is clean. Right? You have to learn how to clean it. And where in the Israeli army, where do you learn how to clean a gun? They take you to the dustiest, windiest place imaginable where dust and sand gets into everything and say, okay, go clean your gun. And you clean it, and then you're just about to put it back together, and a whole bunch of dust falls out. You take it out, you do it again, okay. Right? But then you get good at cleaning your gun. Right? A soldier spends time thinking about how good a soldier he is, or he's busy being a soldier the whole time. We know what the answer to the question is, and that's what the Rebbe is talking about. Right? That's what he's talking about. Does that soldier not have a conversation with the guy next to him? Of course he does. Right? Now, if they're under fire, he doesn't. Right? There's people shooting at them. They don't do that. I've told you guys the story. When I did basic training, so I was an old man. I wasn't an old man. I was 30 years old. I was one of the youngest guys in the group because it was all people who had moved to the country, and we did 4 weeks of basic training. We didn't do a serious basic training like the real guys. Real guys do 6 months. We did 4 weeks. And like Peseda, you learn how to, in those days there were 3 guns. You learn how to shoot the guns and clean the guns. There was an Uzi, I think it was called a Galil or Galili, and an M16, right? The M16, which is the American gun. That's the gun most people walked around with. Now I forgot what I was going to talk about relative to the army.
3 guns?
Yeah, no, Peseda. So we spent a lot of time talking to our officers. Our officers was all younger than us. They were all 19, they were 20, most of them. Most of the officers were in their last year, they were leaving. We were one of the last things they were doing, and then they were out of the army. One of them, they were all friends together. One of them had signed on Keva, and he had another year to go, at least, because he had signed on to become an officer. So, and he was the officer of them. So these guys would take care of us. But we got to know them, and they were very, very interesting young men, I must say. So we asked them about their basic training, because their basic training was a little different than ours. It was pretty serious. So we said, well, what did you do? So they were in San Khanin, right? So at the end of their basic training, they did a march from Yerushalayim to Chulon, which is just south of Tel Aviv, with 50 pounds on their back, everything in their backpack. And they would always put a couple of guys on stretchers, right? The guys who weren't in good enough shape to do the march, they would die on the march, so they put them on a stretcher, and you take turns carrying them. So they were always the heaviest guys also, right? They take turns carrying them. And he said, we didn't walk, we sort of trotted. So it's about 50 kilometers. Right, with 50 pounds on your back, and not on the road. Right, they're doing it in paths in the desert, in the forest, and then they go on the road a little, and then, but places where you can walk. They didn't have to climb over trees. So he said, okay, no. He said, well, you basically halfway through, you want to die. Your chest is hurting so much, you think your heart is going to come out of your chest, and you're just going to die on the spot, and you just take another step, and you just keep doing this, and then you make it to Cholon. So okay. So we're talking to them. They're really interesting kids. He says, no, what was that all about? He said, well, I guess the idea was they got us to a point where we realized there wasn't anything we couldn't do. If we had to do it, we could do it. So then we asked them, did that ever happen? When you were, okay, so then you did that in basic training. Then what? You ever do that in the army? He said, yes, actually we did. We said we went to Lebanon. We were under fire for 36 hours straight, and if you fell asleep, you probably didn't wake up because you got shot. Yeah, but there's a good chance you're going to get shot if you fell asleep because you had to know exactly where they were coming from, and we kept moving around so they couldn't find us because they were over there, and we could see where they were coming from, but they kept moving, and it's all forests and hills. It's very hard to. They know the land better than we do, right? Because they live there. So he said we went to fire for 36 hours, which meant you had to stay up for 36 hours. We managed. From that run, we learned that whatever you have to do, you do. Wow. we looked at these guys in a different way after that. Right? They're just regular 20-year-old kids, right? They were so excited to get out of the army. They were just so excited. They were getting out. I think a couple of them right after they finished with us. Right? And they had never dealt with older guys before. One of the people in our unit had been he had worked training soldiers in the Soviet army for 20 years. So he had more experience than them in doing what we'd call boot camp in America, right? So at a certain point, they just let Gennady take care of us. They would, Gennady, they said, Gennady, you know how to do this better than us. So we'll show up and you tell them what to do. So Gennady would line us up in the morning, and Gennady would tell us whatever. So they just watched. But these kids were special kids. They just thought about it. They learned something in the army that I wish we could teach in yeshiva, but we can't. There's no way. Right? Did that, people would leave in droves. Right? Just leave in droves. You'd end up with 2 people. Right? That's what it was. In that, that's what it was. I mean, I've told you the stories of Rav Nanas. Rav Nanas went there. At some point, it was so hard that Rav Nanas went to with a couple of Bachrim. He was very close to the Rebbe Shab's wife. So he went to the Rebbetzin Sternasar and said that they wanted to talk to the Rebbe about something. How could they do that? She said, well, come to the house and you'll just wait in the living room. And when the Rebbe comes home, so you'll ask him some questions. She let them do that. So the Rebbe was ambushed by these Tmimim in his house when he came home. And so what did they ask the Rebbe? It's so hard. Why does it have to be so hard? They were 7 o'clock in the morning. Chassidus was from 7:30 to 9:30. They had to be. They 7 o'clock was you could have some tea. It doesn't say coffee. The Rebbe Shab writes all this in Kuntzeit Chaim at the end of Kuntzeit Chaim. What the seder of the day was. 7 o'clock was tea, and it might be there would be a biscuit or something. The tea, they used to drink tea like Russians, right? How do Russians drink tea? You put a sugar cube in the mouth and drink the tea, and the tea goes through the sugar cube. And sooner or later, the sugar cube dissolves, and then you wash it down. That's how they would drink tea. With this burning hot tea at first, right? They didn't put it they didn't put the sugar in the tea. They'd keep it. They put a sugar cube in their mouth. That's how they drink tea. Whether the Tamimim put sugar in their tea, I don't know. But that's how the Russians drank tea. So they would be then 7:30, 9:30 was Chassidus. Then they would daven till 12 o'clock was they would daven and eat breakfast. 12 to 8 was Nigla Seder. 12 o'clock to 8 o'clock. If they had to daven mincha in there, they would in the winter. If in the summer they didn't, so they would daven mincha after. 8 to 9 was a time to eat. There would be a break. 9 to 11 was Chassidus, and that went 6 days a week. Friday you'd stop a couple hours before Shabbos, meaning summer Seder, and would be till 6 o'clock Friday. And that was every day, including Chol HaMoed, including everything. 2 years you weren't allowed to leave the yeshiva for a day. Not a Shabbos, not a Yom Tov, nothing. Not a sibling's wedding, nothing. You're in yeshiva for 2 years, every single day. Right? It's hard. It's hard work. And they were working. It's not just sitting there. The mimer, the Rebbe, we talked about this before also, the mimer that the Rebbe Shab said Friday night, they had to know that mimer Baal Peh Sunday morning, which means they didn't get a lot of sleep on Shabbos because they were chazering the mimer. He said you went around a while, you got better and you could sleep Mitzi Shabbos, but he said just nonstop, push it nonstop. So they asked the Rebbe, why so hard? It's just too hard. And now this is 1915. This question was asked. Wait, is that right? No, probably 1916. Right? Because Rav Nanas got to Lubavitch. No, this is probably 1914-15. Rav Nanas got to Lubavitch, Shavuos Tafresh Ayin Gimel. Shavuos 1913. That's when he got to Lubavitch. He was a 15-year-old. And he was there 2 years. And this was probably near the end because he was already been around and knew his way around. And so this is 1915. So the Rebbe Shab said to them, strange winds are blowing, and you're going to have to be Meiser Nefesh. You're going to have to exhibit the serious Nefesh in a way that hasn't been shown for a very long time. And then he used a word, I don't know where he got this word, right? And the Rav Nana said to me, that the Rebbe said to them, now there's no way the Rebbe said this word to them. It's not happening. First of all, they're speaking in Yiddish. He was talking to me in Hebrew. But there's no way the Rebbe, he used an English word. They said, and this is your boot camp. Now, there's no way the Rebbe Shab said boot camp. I don't know. What did the Rebbe Shab say to them? I don't know. But the equivalent of boot camp. How Rav Nanas knew the word boot camp, I have no idea. I've heard of the Marines before. But anyway, Rav Nanas said, the Rebbe said, boot camp shalachem. This is preparing you for Mesiras Nefesh, the likes of which no generation has exhibited for a long time.
It was just before the Russian Revolution.
Just before the Russian Revolution. And all these guys, Rav Nanas said, 90% of the students that he studied in yeshiva with died in Stalin's camps. He said not one stopped keeping Shabbos and stopped eating kosher food. Not one. Now, there might be one. I don't know. That's what he said. I'm not. This is not a scientific survey. Excuse me, the noise. I'm sorry. I usually don't have it on, but I had to get a phone call last night and I had to hear it. But today is birthday day in the Kaplan family. Son-in-law and 2 grandchildren. They all have birthdays today. Aleph Adar. Right? Maishi, the Varaleya, and our son-in-law Ali, they all have birthdays. So these are all the birthday. Everybody's waking up and they're sending birthday greetings on the Kaplan gang. That's what's happening here. Right? So everybody's getting their birthday greetings. Right? So that was what was going on at Democrat Demimim by these guys were. So this sounds just impossible, but this is what the Rebbe wants. Why? Well, it's what the Eibshter wants. Right? Am I there? No. Am I in a place where hopefully I can understand that that's what truth really is? Hopefully, yes. Because I don't have to be in a place before I accept it as truth. Right? And that's really the important thing.
So the boot camps help them in the actual camps?
What?
So the boot camp of yeshiva helped them in the actual camp, later?
The boot camp in yeshiva helped them realize that God's real and the Soviets aren't. And no matter what they tell you, you have to stay connected to God. And they were willing to give up their life for that. And he said 90% of the students he was in yeshiva with gave up their life. He said not one of them stopped keeping Shabbos. What were they doing, these guys? The Frierdiker Rebbe, because the Frierdiker Rebbe became Rebbe in 1920. And that's, things, there was a revolution in 1917. There was a civil war for the next 3 or 4 years between the whites and the reds, what were called the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. So the Bolsheviks won. The Mensheviks probably weren't any better than the Bolsheviks, but the Bolsheviks won. And that was Lenin, but then Lenin died and Stalin took over, and then he was the all-star team of evil. And he's up there with Genghis Khan and the guy from Austria who took over Germany. Their life got pretty hard, and what the Frierdiker Rebbe kept open Chadarim for Jewish children all over Russia. And Lazer Nanis, this person who was telling me these stories about what life was really like back then. So his job, he was sent to Siberia for 20 years. His job before he was sent to Siberia was raising money for those yeshivas. The Rebbe told him to become an accountant. And accountants wait in line in banks. In banks, people have money. Either they're putting it in or they're taking it out. So wait in line with the banks, find the Jews, and ask them for donations to run the underground yeshivas that are going on in the Soviet Union. So that's what he did. So he raised money for those yeshivas. And finally, he was convicted. They arrested him, and he was very excited. He had a very heavy Russian accent, but he used to love to speak Hebrew. He came here when he was 70. Came here when he was 70. And he was born in Taf Reish Nun Zayin. And he came here in Taf Shin Chav Zayin. He came here right after the 6-Day War, laser. So Friedrich Rebbe told him he was going to get out of Russia, and he said that's what kept him alive in the camps, because he knew he wasn't going to die in the camps, and so he could go to sleep every night. So what killed people in the camps was not knowing what was going to be, because every day you'd go out to work in the forest, to work in the factory, and the guy standing next to you was so exhausted that he would fall, and they would just shoot him in the head and leave him there, so you could see him while you were working, so he would make sure that you went next. This was every day. Right? They killed 20. The minimal number is 20 million. Right? Solzhenitsyn claims 60 million Russians were killed in the camps. Right? So he said you'd get work in the forest, and the guy would fall down. He was exhausted. He'd fall down. They'd just come over, shoot him in the head, and leave him there so you could see him. No one ever moved him. That was the last place he ever was. Animals came, who knows what. So he said he saw this every day, and it just wore on you. I mean, it was very hard to keep it together in such a. He said what gave him he had absolute bitachon he was getting out, because before he went into the camps, the last time he saw the Friedrich Rebbe, before he was arrested, he saw the Friedrich Rebbe was leaving Russia, and he went to see him on the way out. And the Rebbe said that he would. Now, this is a ridiculous thing to say to someone in 1930 in Soviet Russia. The Friedrich Rebbe told Leizer Nanas, "You will make it out and end up in Eretz Yisrael." Think of Eretz Yisrael in Soviet Russia in 1930. But he made it. He got here in 1967 when they built Shikun Chabad in Yerushalayim, right below Toys Emes. There's that neighborhood. It's called Shikun Chabad. So when they built it, the Rebbe asked them to leave one apartment for Leizer and his wife, because they're getting out of Russia and they'll need a place to live. And it should be on the ground floor because he has bad feet. So he had an apartment on the ground floor. Couldn't hear. So when you pressed his button, the light went on. So he'd see the light, and then he'd shuffle over to the door and open the door. My wife and I used to learn with him different times. I'd learn. So he would tell stories also about life back then. So he got out, he said, because he slept like a baby every night. So I said, Yashanti como tinok. They were serious guys, these guys. We read this and we might say, nah, this is not shaykh because I'm not there. The fact that I'm not there doesn't mean that this isn't truth. And you hear a story. Some people, there's people who hear stories about Hasidim, and there's two different reactions. One is they don't believe the story. Why not? Well, they're not there, and so it's too hard, and so they somehow try to dismiss the story. Someone else is smart enough to realize, right, this story isn't about me, it's about him. The story is about Rav Mendel, it's not about me. If the story about me, it wouldn't be like this. That's true, but it's not about me. It's about him, right? And he is there. Okay, so then is that possible? Yes, right. When Rav Zela Pliskin was asked by the Abba Pliskin was asked by the Rebbe to forbring someone, he asked the Rebbe, well, how do you forbring? The Rebbe said you say over Sikha and you tell a story about Chasidim. When he came out of Yechidus with the Rebbe, so Rav Mendel was with him, Rav Mendel Futafas, and they were discussing what the Rebbe said to him, and they're trying to figure out why did the Rebbe say that when you forbring, you should say over a Sikha and then tell a story about Chasidim. So first of all, why the Sikha first, and why the Rebbe didn't say a Chassidish story, he said a story about Chasidim, which is different. A Chassidish story could be about Rebbeim. So they came to the following conclusion. Right, wrong, we don't know, but this is what their conclusion was. For us, it's good. It was that first of all, you say over Sikha. So you encounter truth. And then what? Then you tell a story about Chassidim. So it might be the people who are hearing the story say, oh, come on, that's not shaykh. How can I possibly live up to it? I'm sorry. You tell the story about Chassidim, and then you say over the Sikha. I'm sorry. All right, the other way. All right, so there you say over the story about Chassidim. And then you say the Sikha. So at the end of the Sikha, someone might say, how can I possibly live up to that? That's so hard. That's so challenging. It's not shaykh. It's not relevant for anybody to be there. Then you say, wait a minute. You don't remember the story we just said about those Hasidim? Now, if you tell a story about the Rebbe, so what are they going to say to you? Well, he's a Rebbe. I mean, what do you want from me? I mean, I'm not a Rebbe. But if you tell a story about Rav Mendel, what can you say? I'm not a chassid? Well, what do you mean? I don't understand. What does that mean? Rav Mendel was just like us. He wasn't just like us at all, but he was, right? I mean, he wasn't a Rebbe. He was just a regular, everyday Jew who challenged himself to become this incredible person. A soldier. Okay. So that's what the Rebbe is asking you. Rather difficult? Yes. Are you going to read? What does he say? What does Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai say? I've been so busy doing what it is that the Eibishter wants from me, I haven't had any time to think about what I've accomplished. Now, this last day of his life, he's laying there and he says, I wonder, where did I make it in life? Like, why? Now I'm not doing anything. I'm laying here. I'm about to go. So then he had time. He said, right? So amazing. Now that whole idea, we have to talk about it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Cheshbon nefesh. Where's the cheshbon nefesh fit in this? Okay. Well, doesn't seem to fit. Am I supposed to be making a cheshbon nefesh? Where I am? What has to be better? What has to be worse? Okay. So firstly, we'll talk about it at length tomorrow. But firstly, the cheshbon nefesh, a Jewish cheshbon nefesh isn't, and especially in our generation, because the Rebbe tells us this very, very clearly, and we learned it together. The cheshbon nefesh isn't breaking my heart about what was. The cheshbon nefesh is preparing for what's going to be. Right? If you're running a business and at the end of the year you sit down with everybody to discuss what happened the previous year, what's the whole purpose of discussing what happened the previous year? Why are you doing that? So that everybody will fall off their chair and feel like failures? No. What's the business interested in?
Outline the next step.
Next year, right? The only reason you're sitting and talking about what happened last year is to make sure that next year's better, right? Wait, what worked this year? Well, we'll do that. What didn't work? Well, either we'll scrap it completely or we'll realize we're going to have to do that in a different way because the way we did it didn't work. That ad campaign didn't work. Okay, so are we going to completely and totally throw that out the window, or are we going to say, no, I think it could work, but we'll try it a different way? Okay, that's a cheshbon nefesh of a company. And they're serious because they really want to make money. They're serious about this. This isn't conceptual. This is real. Okay, so do I really want to do what it is that the Eibishter wants from me? Yeah, okay, so then what do I have to worry about? I have to worry about, well, what's the next step? What am I going to do next? Now, I might have to look back and see, well, what worked and what didn't work. Okay. That chavrusa worked, great, let's try to keep it going. That chavrusa, we spent too much time talking. Okay, so maybe that's not a chavrusa for the future. Okay. Or maybe that chavrusa can be a chavrusa for the future, but I'm going to make sure that we don't talk as much. Whatever it happens to be. Right? That was one tiny little example. But in yeshivas, the chavrusas are important. Right? Okay. But the one thing that the Hasidim knew after this mimer, they knew this already, but what they really knew after this mimer was this Rebbe doesn't fool around. Mm-hmm. This is a year into the Rebbe being Rebbe. The Rebbe is a relatively young Rebbe. I'm sure you've heard the Rebbe's voice in those days. It's a much younger voice. The Rebbe's talking much more quickly than most people heard the Rebbe talk. The Rebbe talked more slowly in the older days, right? In the early, the Rebbe was talking more quickly, a higher pitched voice, a younger voice. This is a 50-year-old Rebbe. The Rebbe's 50 years old.
Was this one recorded? Or
it's recorded. No, it was said on Shabbos. This mimer was said on Shabbos, not recorded. But it's so challenging. It's just frightening. Did we chase away your partner in crime in the coffee yesterday? We came to one class and that was it. He was up this morning. That was it. He
said he's just not feeling.
Okay, so he should feel better. I'm worried yesterday's class was a little different.
I said I think that's a great introduction to.
It was a little wild yesterday. But look, this mimer it's a challenging mimer. To walk into this, I'm sorry, Mordechai. This is the Rebbe doesn't challenge us like this every day. He does, but we don't run into it every day. This is just push it heavy. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Yeah. But you see that. I mean, if that's why.